We're here at Drayton Hall, which is a historic site of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. The Draytons were an important South Carolina family. They played critical roles in the formation and development of the colony of South Carolina and in the formation of the nation itself. And in fact, if you follow their trajectory through the 19th century, you'll see following the different descendants, how the nation came apart as well. So the Drayton family allows us to follow both the birth and development of the Carolina colony, the birth and development of the nation, and the fracturing of the nation during the Civil War and its coming together. Concurrent with the Drayton family were African American families who were here. This was a plantation. There was an enslaved community here of African Americans since its establishment. In fact, the landscape that we see around us was shaped by the hands and minds of African Americans, as well as the house behind me as well. Drayton Hall is remarkable because rather than being restored to a particular period, as at Monticello or Mount Vernon, or being reconstructed to a particular period as at Colonial Williamsburg or Old Sturbridge Village, instead the philosophy here of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, when it acquired Drayton Hall, was to preserve or to stabilize the site rather than to take it to one particular moment in time. So as a result, we see a timeline of history rather than a time capsule. We don't see this as a working plantation as this had been in the 18th and 19th centuries. We don't see slave quarters. We don't see the tenant houses, the blacksmith shops, the things that were part and parcel of plantation life. The floor plan of the house was laid out in a fashion that was intended to demonstrate the wealth and status and sophistication of its owner, John Drayton. As you go through the house and you look at specific features, in the first floor great hall, for example, the mantle and overmantle are derived from plate in a book by William Kent, The Designs of Inigo Jones, published in 1727. Also, as you go through the house, you'll see again these overlays of culture. You'll see woodwork that is original to the period 1738 to about 1742 or 1740s. You'll see original ceiling of that period, hand sculpted. You'll see paint of the 1880s. And in some cases, some of the rooms, that's only the third or fourth coat of paint to have ever stood on those walls. You'll see on the second floor, in the second floor great hall, a room that illustrates the rise and fall of white plantation society, in that you'll see the elegant original woodwork of the 18th century, a mantle and overmantle, very stylish again to the 18th century. But you'll see above wooden boards for serving as a ceiling, because during the Civil War, water had gotten into the house and all of those elegant ceilings had collapsed. And the Draytons had lost most of their money, managed to recoup a portion of their money through the mining of a marine deposit calcium phosphate here, and then were able to make repairs to the house and then boarded over that ceiling, but not going back to the original elegant style of the 18th century. When you visit plantations like Drayton Hall, it's important to remember that everything that we see around us, the landscape, the buildings, the furniture, whatever it may be, all these things are the products of the hands and minds of both black people and white people over time. So the landscape that we see here was shaped by African Americans, and it was their labor, enforced labor as slaves, that produced the wealth. And the Draytons also played a role because they were the ones who managed all this. We think that some periods of times there may have been 40 to 100 slaves just within this area of Drayton Hall. But to run this house itself, the Draytons had cooks, they had a butler, they would have had stable hands, they would have had blacksmiths, they had carpenters, and we've gone through the slave lists and have identified the names of these individuals as well. We have then tried to highlight those places that are distinctively African American, like the African American Cemetery that dates to the 1790s. And we've done careful research that show that area to have been a cemetery that dates to that period, making it the oldest documented African American cemetery, we think, in the nation, still in use. And descendants of the African American community from Drayton Hall can be interred there. And the last person to be interred there was Richmond Bowens, who was born here in 1908, died in 1998, and who was a remarkable source of oral history for us and did a lot of work in educating people when they came to Drayton Hall about this site as he remembered it growing up. For example, his parents and the African American community here used the natural resources around them for medicinal purposes. Access to medical care was very limited for African Americans in the early 1900s. And he referred to these woods around me and said this was, quote, our drugstore. This was our drugstore.
I'm Catherine Braxton, and Drayton Hall was the place where my ancestors were enslaved, and some that were born here that were free, that one of them being Willis Johnson Sr., who's my grandfather.
My name is Rebecca Campbell, and my ancestors were born here, and some enslaved, some were free. I am the granddaughter of Willis Johnson Sr. and the great-granddaughter of Catherine and Friday Johnson.
We believe that our great-grandmother, Catherine Bowens, who I also am Catherine, and my great-grandmother was Catherine, was in charge of the house. And when I say in charge of the house, the big house, that she was responsible for supervising the kitchen, the laundry, being sure that the family was, that they got their meals and whatnot. And she supervised that, and that is my understanding. Some of the information that we have came through Richmond Bowens, and Richmond was born here and had a very good memory. And he pointed out these things to us. This is the African American Cemetery at Drayton Hall. And this is where many of our ancestors are buried. You may not find or see many headstones, but you'll see a slight indentation in the ground, which indicate that that is a plot. Some of the stones you may find that are slightly tilted or slightly damaged, but they are here. And we are grateful for that, because it takes us back into time so that we can see and get the feel of what our ancestors went through here at Drayton Hall. Going back to Richmond Bowens, he plays a major role here at Drayton Hall. But this was a dedication as well as a memorial. And I'm very pleased with the arch, the way it is. And it has the words of Richmond Bowens, "Leave him rest." And that came about as a result of a suggestion to beautify this sacred spot. And Richmond said he thought it was not necessary to leave those who are buried here. Let them rest. You don't need to beautify this area. And I agree with that. You know, just standing here now, you have a feeling that how you are in touch with nature, your ancestors are, it's peaceful here. So leave him rest is on that arch. And those are the words of Richmond Bowens. This place matters. If not to anybody else, it matters to me because it involves my ancestors that left a legacy here at Drayton Hall. I have learned over time some of the things that they have done and have been involved with, and it matters to me. And it should also have some matter in some way to others as well. And I'd like to get that out, and also to encourage others that may have been involved in a similar situation, that wherever their ancestors are, which again are part of your history, that they should be included and it should matter to them as well. And this is just an example of what can happen, to be involved, and we do try to do that. And Drayton Hall allows us to do that. We are involved, and I appreciate it greatly.